Everyone has that one anime they can never get into no matter how much your friends recommend it to you. And for me, that anime was Haikyuu. After years of being told to give it a chance, being assured I'll love it, and having seen some of the hypest clips from the series, I reluctantly decided to give it a shot. I watched about 10 episodes of the anime, and my honest review of the series was, this anime is hot mid. I found it to honestly be on the boring side. It takes a long time for things to really get going. So much content in the early parts of this long-running series is spent on training, and when they do eventually hit the court, I found the early games to have a very low impact on me. And for a series that's main selling point is its strong character development, when you're first introduced to said characters, they come off as extremely generic at first. And to be fair, I don't know the first thing about volleyball, and that's probably an important factor when it comes to your overall enjoyment. But it's not that I'm against sports anime as a whole. I've watched a fair share of sports anime about sports I have zero interest in and was able to have a good time. But if I'm watching a sports anime, I want to see the most unrealistic plays imaginable that defy logic because I'm watching an anime. And Haikyuu isn't that type of show. Pretty much every play you will see animated can be more or less performed in real life. And before you go ahead and make assumptions about me because I prefer crazy unrealistic anime sports compared to watching even real sports for that matter, no, I was not that guy that was cold in 2K but couldn't hoop in real life.
What the? What? Man, this is not 2K!
I've always been a fan of the golden 3-episode rule, and I gave Haikyuu well over that. I gave it a shot, but concluded it just wasn't for me. But as time went on, I met more and more people who loved Haikyuu and had it as their favorite anime of all time. A ton of people I would end up meeting throughout the years just happened to own Kurasa no High shirts proudly repping the series. Seeing how many people held the show in such high regards, claiming it to be their favorite anime even after the conclusion, it was just something I couldn't comprehend from a show I thought was extremely average. I found that astounding how an anime that I didn't find any interest in at all about high schoolers playing volleyball was able to captivate so many people around the world. So years later, after I had written Haikyuu off, I decided to give it a second chance. If you're someone on the fence about Haikyuu because it doesn't appeal to you, or someone like me who gave it a chance and dropped it, this video is for you. As someone with no interest in volleyball whatsoever, who hated the anime at first, I was able to change my mind about it and learn to appreciate what this series has to offer. The story of Haikyuu follows Hinata Shoya, a below-average height middle schooler who gets inspired to play volleyball one day from watching a local high school volleyball player of similar height known as the Little Giant play in nationals. He's someone with no prior training in the sport who ends up competing with prodigies as the story progresses. He's someone with no fundamentals to speak of whatsoever, but with overflowing passion for the sport. In a sport where height is a huge advantage, he's considered a joke of a player for being considered to be put on the court. If you've seen any shonen anime, you know this main character. The world is against him, but he's gonna prove the world wrong. Some may even go as far to refer to him as Orange Hair Asta. His main rival by comparison is Kageyama, a prodigy with exceptional talent that, by a weird twist of events, ends up playing on the same high school team, Kurasa no High, as Hinata. He's the complete opposite of Hinata in almost every way, but what they do have in common is their love for volleyball and their desire to improve. So Kageyama acknowledges his passion and considers him his rival. Some may even go as far to say he's Hinata's Yuno. When my friends had first recommended this anime to me, the main selling point was its exceptional characters. However, when I had finally given the show a chance, it felt like I had been lied to. A lot of the first impressions the main team left me painted them in this very generic light. This guy's the hothead of the team that happens to be bald. This is the silent female manager. This is the cool older coach, the caring captain of the team in his last year of high school, the third year who was on hiatus that everyone wants to come back, the guy who was completely uninterested that puts in minimal effort. This one actually turned out to be my favorite character. They start off very bland when you first get to meet them because it leaves room for their growth as the story progresses. The problem being a lot of the early development for these characters is honestly in my opinion just not that interesting, specifically surrounding the main duo, and this is a statement I stand by to this day. In Hinata's case, from the start of the story, his only redeeming quality is that despite being small, he can jump really high, so he uses his jumps and speed to quickly spike the ball in the blink of an eye, catching his opponents off guard. And this is mainly due to the fact that Kageyama can pass him the ball so well. Without Kageyama, he's pretty much worthless. The value he adds to the team is essentially him being the ultimate decoy. Other teams focus too much on Hinata, causing them to ignore the other players, allowing them to play better. And a lot of the things Hinata does early on in order to improve at volleyball as a player are learning to do stuff as simple as actually looking at the ball before he hits it because he was spiking with his eyes closed before for whatever reason. A lot of his improvements early on come from working on aspects of his gameplay that could be considered the bare minimum, and when his development as a player comes from things as simple as actually looking and aiming where he goes for a spike, I can't help but roll my eyes over it. Stuff like this caused me to almost get frustrated with his character and made me not really like Hinata at first because he felt very basic. There's probably a myriad of shonen anime where the protagonist is bad at almost everything but good at only one thing, and all they do to improve is perfect that one thing that they're good at. And Hinata just felt like another number to me. I assumed he was going to go the whole series with his only redeeming quality being that of the ultimate decoy. When people would tell me this series has peak character development, it made me feel crazy because I just couldn't see it at all. It felt like I was missing something, and it turns out I was missing something. It wasn't until season 4 of the anime that I began to really like Hinata, where other shonen protagonists will get a power up by presenting a new character in the story that is only now relevant to the plot, who will train the protagonist and give them a new power presented on a silver platter in order to help them reach that next level. Hinata doesn't really get that. Season 4, Hinata's rivals get invited to training camps where they are going to level up and improve their play dramatically, while Hinata doesn't get any invite, and the reason for this is because without his setter Kageyama, he's kind of a liability to the team, and now he's starting to realize this. He's not a bad volleyball player, but he's stuck at the roadblock that pretty much everyone who wants to improve at something goes through in life, regardless if it's a sport or not. It feels like you've peaked, but you know you can do better and you want to do better, you just don't know what the next step to take is. So where other series would introduce a new character to help train the protagonist because the plot demands it, Hinata actually does something really cool that's completely in line for his character. Hinata actually overcomes this roadblock himself. He takes a step back and analyzes his play and how others play, being able to make educated guesses on where the ball is going to end up by looking at his opponent's body language. Instead of focusing on the one thing he's good at and perfecting that, he finally develops his fundamentals. This is the moment he finally becomes a well-rounded player instead of a one-trick pony who needs to rely on his setter, and it's so rewarding as a viewer for him to come to this realization himself. Watching Hinata start to do stuff like properly receiving a ball and his teammates' shocked reactions to him being able to suddenly do this now was one of the most enjoyable parts of the series to me, because the character that was shown to me in episode 1 essentially did a complete 180 and redefined his entire playstyle. And the fact that he accomplished this all on his own is so good. Moments like this are what I can get behind. When people tell me Haikyuu has some of the best character development you will find in any anime, after seeing stuff like this, I can see where they're coming from. My only problem with it is that I changed my opinion of Hinata in season 4 of the anime after watching over 50 episodes for an anime that I wasn't enjoying at first. So while the series does have some really good character developments, for me it took a real long time for me to fully appreciate them. It's funny, because when I first heard of Haikyuu at first, it was because it was being compared to another sports anime I was super into at the time that I honestly might still prefer over Haikyuu, Kuroko's Basketball. I didn't end up watching this video, but it was recommended to me while writing this video, oddly enough. But after experiencing both of these series, I think the comparison that they are similar in any way couldn't be further from the truth. Haikyuu and Kuroko's Basketball are only similar on a surface level, of them both being popular sports manga to have come from Shonen Jump, but other than that, the execution of both shows is completely different. They almost mirror each other in a way in terms of how different they are, which is why I find that when it comes to both of these series, people will end up loving one but hating the other, aka me because I loved Kuroko but hated Haikyuu at first. Even some people I know that have enjoyed both series have a clear preference and prefer one over the other. Probably the biggest difference between the two is, well, let's just call it realism. Kuroko's has these high schoolers do stuff like 720 spins in midair, leaning into a dunk, they shoot fadeaway shots with no form and still manage to get the ball into the net, they're able to perform behind the back layups with ease. Just imagine you create a character in NBA 2K with all the stats maxed out, but times 11 and you get a character from Kuroko's Basketball. I mean, these guys aren't just good, they have abilities that are straight out of Space Jam. There's a character that, I shit you not, can hit consistent 3-point shots from anywhere on the court. Yes, even full court. All with 100% accuracy. He is so accurate to the point he can hit someone on a motorcycle with a milk carton just by shooting it like a basketball. Yes, this really happened, I'm not joking. Kuroko's is one of the stupidest, most unrealistic sports anime ever, and that's why I loved it. I mean, the idea that these high schoolers could just shoot 3-pointers from full court with complete accuracy is ridiculous. But it's also super cool though. Out of context, some of these moments from Kuroko's are extremely hype. That's why, even though I wasn't interested in the first few episodes of the anime when I first watched it, when they did eventually hit the court, I was invested due to the sheer ridiculousness that I was watching. This is the perfect anime to turn your brain off and just witness pure hype. But the hypest moments in Haikyuu by comparison are super simple. No one will be making you lose your mind from something as crazy as a full court 3-pointer. The hypest moment in the series for me is actually something as simple as a regular block. And the only reason these moments are as good as they are is because of the characters, which is something Haikyuu does much better than Kuruko. Kuruko has the 5 members of the Generation of Miracles that are the godlike players I previously mentioned with superhuman abilities. There's also the main duo of the series, meaning there's 7 characters that stand out who are just better than everyone else. And while I do love how ridiculous these characters are, the problem is everyone outside these 7 I find to be forgettable. They do try to get you invested in these characters by giving them some backstory, and maybe you will remember a few of those on the regular roster, but at the end of the day, the characters that will really stand out are the special 7 and not the average Joes of the series. I feel like if you were to ask random people who their favorite character from the series is, 99% of people would pick a name from the list of 7, and that's because they are just better and have the spotlight most of the time. Kuruko's basketball is essentially their story, and the more average characters in the series faded into irrelevancy for me. Which is why I think it's funny that the overall takeaway and final message of the series is that teamwork always wins. This idea really fell on deaf ears for me. There's this thing in Kuruko's called the zone that certain players can enter. If you have to ask what entering the zone means, basically you could just focus really hard and you're able to play basketball better. Think of it kind of like an X Factor where everything about you powers up. Now this might be small spoilers for the final game of the series, but I don't think it's that big of a deal when it comes to your overall enjoyment. But basically, to utilize the full power of the zone, you need your teammates to help unlock the full potential. Because basketball is a team sport and we have to win together. And while I think it's a cute message and makes some sense because the main duo couldn't really beat any of the members of the Generation of Miracles without the help of each other, it ultimately just comes off as a typical anime cliche that flies over my head. The reason for that being that personally, I think it's ridiculous. Let's say for example, Michael Jordan in his prime was in a constant state of the zone every second he was on the court. Michael Jordan definitely did not think of his teammates at all when unlocking the zone. Kuruko's presents the idea that teamwork will win at the end of the day and that even those on the sidelines are helping achieve victory. But they also have characters with individual talent that are just so superior to the rest of their teammates, it makes it hard for me to buy into this idea. When certain players are doing insane logic defining moves on the court, putting up 80 out of the 100 points scored in the game with the hardest of carries, I simply cannot believe that every member of the team is helping towards victory. But in Haikyuu, it actually feels like a team sport where everyone is contributing. Haikyuu really sells you on the idea that every position on the court is equally as important. The team wouldn't have been able to make it this far without a really good setter, without a really good libero, or without a really good middle blocker. If any one of these players were missing, the team probably wouldn't be as successful as they are. They even have players who end up playing the same position, and it's really hard to say which one is better because one is more offense focused while the other one is more defense focused, and they are completely different in how they play volleyball and feel like two sides of the same coin. Pretty much every member on the main roster gets ample screen time to develop. You slowly watch all these members of the main team improve as the story progresses. You watch them lose 80% of their practice games because they try out new techniques during the matches. You watch them go through penalty games when they lose. You watch them fight, celebrate, and cry together, and as a viewer, it makes you feel like you were even a part of the team. One of my favorite characters is actually the substitute setter for the team who was in his last year of high school volleyball, who used to be the main setter but willingly gives up his position for Kageyama because he recognizes his talent and just wants the team to win. And for one of my favorite characters to be someone who spends the majority of his time on the bench is something I couldn't say for Kuruko's, let alone even name you a player that sits on the bench. And I think where Haikyuu really shines is not just the main characters of the team, it's the individual care they put into the really small characters in the series that you don't end up seeing much of, that still manage to be extremely memorable. Take the captain of one of the team's Karasuno faces. Despite being the captain of the team, he's not on the starting roster, and in a flashback, you find out he didn't even own a jersey for his first 2 years of high school. Despite this, he showed up to practice every day and cared for his teammates until eventually in his 3rd year, he finally gets his jersey and sheds tears because it proves to him that his hard work has finally paid off. And he's such a great and memorable character despite only playing a small portion of the match against Karasuno, and this is only a small example that I chose that stuck out to me. A lot of the more important side characters in the series that aren't on Karasuno are even better than this and are well varied. Characters that really stick out that are very interesting include fan favorite Oikawa, the coach of Shiratorizawa, and the setter of Nekoma Ken. Actually, I'd rather not say his name after that one time someone asked me if Kenmon nuts fit in your mouth. I really don't think the Haikyuu and Kuruko's comparison works at all, which is why if I were to compare Haikyuu to something, I'd probably consider Haikyuu to be the Red Dead Redemption 2 of sports anime. Okay, look, I know that was extremely random and this is an anime video, but well, I'm an insane person, so just hear me out on this one. Red Dead Redemption 2 is a critically acclaimed masterpiece. So many people regard this as not just their favorite Rockstar game, but their favorite game, period. I've seen countless people say they wish they could go back in time just to experience this beautiful adventure all over again. It's a technical marvel of a game that tells a very engaging and powerful redemption story with some of the most interesting characters in gaming, that if someone who said they believed this to be Rockstar's magnum opus, I wouldn't disagree. But oh my god, this is one of the most boring games I've ever played that I've actually sunk over 30 hours into and never actually managed to finish. It's such a slow burn of a game that, at times, has this overwhelmingly focus towards realism. Shout out to the best Red Dead 2 review, by the way. And in defense of Red Dead 2, people will say, oh, you just have an attention span of a child if you can't enjoy this game, which is fair because yes, I do have monkey brain. But when I loaded up Red Dead for the first time, I wanted to rob trains and get into shootouts with the boys, and while that is in the game, when I was playing through it, a lot of the early missions the game has you do are stuff like take this kid to go fishing at a lake, go to these 3 people and collect money from them, and go herd some sheep. And while some of these missions are essential to the plot and the story that Red Dead is trying to tell, at the end of the day this isn't riveting gameplay, and I feel like the actual problem that Red Dead 2 has compared to its counterpart GTA 5 for example, is that 1, driving a car is a lot more interesting than me having to mash X repeatedly to make my horse go faster, but secondly is that I feel like the really memorable missions in Red Dead 2 that happen, like pulling up to a mansion guns blazing with your crew, happen much later into the campaign opposed to something like robbing a jewelry store in Grand Theft Auto 5 that happens much earlier. But it's not just the gameplay. Specifically the story moments that are extremely impactful that happen, that kind of make Red Dead 2 into the masterpiece it is for some people, happen 3/4 into the game. And the thing is with Red Dead 2 is that some of the most iconic moments actually sound really lame on paper, like having a montage of you and your friend building a house together for example. And stuff like the main character having a conversation with a nun about how he says he's afraid of death out of context aren't that interesting. Like, no shit, everyone is afraid of dying, and someone who's done bad things in the past and now wants to do good isn't revolutionary storytelling. But these are the best moments in the series because you as a player have spent well over 50, 60, 70 hours playing as this asshole who doesn't give a shit about any of the people's lives he's destroying. And watching him slowly grow and try to become a better person as the story progresses in its final acts is only able to have such a strong impact because the game forces you to be an asshole for the majority of your playthrough. So that scene where some guy saying is afraid of dying becomes so much more special because it's coming from someone that you got to witness from a first person perspective, who's done some absolutely unforgivable things in the past that genuinely does want to do some good in the time that he has left. It's only because the game took all that time and effort in the beginning of the game with stuff like hanging out with your crew and taking the child fishing and collecting debts that you might not have wanted to do at first, make pretty much the entire last acts of Red Dead 2 the most memorable parts of the game for some people. And this is why it reminds me so much about Haikyuu. Before I had decided to give Haikyuu a second chance, I watched one of the hypest moments in the series in the form of Hinata receiving a ball. It's very well animated and most people would probably get a little hyped watching this clip. But in my case, it wasn't able to elicit any reaction from me. Because when I saw the clip without context, when the only knowledge of what was happening was that this was the main character playing a tournament match, I didn't really care. It's just him receiving a ball is what I thought at the time. But when I had watched that moment again, when I had finally got there properly in the anime, was when I was able to finally realize why everyone else was losing their minds at this scene. It was only after I had first started watching the anime and I began to think very little of Hinata and how generic I thought he was. And slowly watching him to do stupidly basic things to improve, like open his eyes and jump higher, and stuff like watching him shed tears when he would lose, as well as him having fights with his teammates, was when I was finally able to fully appreciate this moment for what it was worth and how far he has come as a character. This moment made all the frustration and boredom I had with the early parts of the series disappear because I realized that it was all leading up to this moment right here. And I have to say, the payoff was worth it. It took a while for me to get there, but I was finally able to say I do think Haikyuu is pretty good. To me, I think Haikyuu is a series with a lot of mid in it, but they have some exceptionally high highs that end up paying off if you are willing to invest in it. And I think it depends a lot on your personality if you are willing to give it a shot or not. If you're someone like me who enjoys strong openings and typically likes immediate payoff when you watch an anime, Haikyuu might turn you off. But hey, if you decide to give Haikyuu a shot and decide it still isn't for you, you never know. I do think the later payoffs are worth it if you manage to get into the later parts of the series if you're not enjoying it. I'm someone like that who wasn't enjoying it for a while, but gave Haikyuu a second chance, and I have to say, I'm glad I did.